Hello everyone, and welcome to this quick tutorial in which we are going to explore the CLI console of AWS Cloud. I've divided this tutorial in two parts. In the first part, we are going to set up our environment to get the CLI access. In the second part, we are going to build the commands step by step to launch an instance. And then we are going to end up this course by summarizing what we have learned so far. I'm really excited about this, and I highly recommend that if you have not created AWS account so far, do it right away so that you can follow me along. Let's get started. The first step would always be to log into the console. So AWS Cloud gives you a GUI console. You can visit aws.amazon.com and click on sign in icon. Or if you have not created the account so far, you can click on create a free account. This will redirect you to the login page. You have two types of accounts here. One is your root user account and the other is IAM user account. For the first time when you create your account, you have to select root user, then enter your username, which will be your email ID. Now let's think about accessing the same console via CLI. In order to log in to the AWS Cloud console via CLI, the command which we are going to use is AWS configure. Wait a second, but you must be thinking, can I run this command on my CLI? Let's check it out. If I try AWS and then question mark, it is giving me an error as AWS is not recognized. Even if I try AWS configure, it is again saying AWS is not recognized. So by default, your system will not be able to understand the commands which AWS Cloud understands. So you would have to install an external package on your system so that from your system, you will be able to control or give commands to the AWS console. So let's see the steps which are involved in this. AWS provides a CLI package which needs to be installed. And after installing this, you have to create a user account from your Cloud Console such that the user which is created has CLI access privilege. So let's see on how can we install this AWS CLI package. This CLI package comes in two flavors, version 1 and version 2. Version 2 is the latest and would be supporting latest features of your AWS Cloud. So it is always recommended to install version 2. The first step in installing this package would be you visit this website. The moment you visit this website, it will give you a pop-up. You have to download this package. After downloading it, once you run this package, it will give you a pop-up saying this might be a harmful package. You can go ahead and click on OK. Then you will get the interface to install the AWS CLI package. Just click on next. Accept the license agreement. It will show you the default path on which the package is going to be installed. You can click on next. Then you go ahead with the installation. The installation has started. And after a while, you will see this installation will get completed. How do I verify? In order to verify whether the installation has completed or not, I will be using AWS --version command to see now AWS CLI package is successfully installed on my system, and I will be able to run the commands which AWS Cloud understands. Now, the next step would be to create a user account with sufficient CLI privilege. So once you log into your AWS GUI console, you would have to visit to security and identity access management. This is the kind of service wherein you create multiple user accounts which will be part of your organization and performing different tasks. After you visit on IAM service page, you'll be going to users and then click on add a user. You can give it any name that you want as per your requirement, and make sure that the access type which you select is programmatic access. This will give the user ID that you are going to create a sufficient level of access to run CLI commands. Next would be defining your policy. You are going to control the level of access that this user is having. So now I am interested in restricting this user to not have access to mainly IAM. So I'm just selecting power user access. There are multiple default policies which are available for you when creating a new user. You can even customize based on your requirement. Then we'll click on next tags. This step is ideally not required, but definitely recommended to understand the different resources based on they are related to which specific department, what are the department names. Maybe you can give them a specific name. So the tags that you are going to associate with your different resources will always be having two features. First is the key, and then next is the value. You can have multiple tags associated with the different resources that you create, whether it is an instance or a user account. Then we click on next and click on create user. Now, this is one of the most important steps. Once you click on create user, you will be shown the username, the access key ID, and the secret access key. Make sure you click on download to download these credentials. These will be the credentials which you are going to use when you are logging from your Windows or Linux system to AWS CLI. If you by mistake you click on close without clicking on download, you will not be able to see these keys again. So you have to create another user account. So that's why it is recommended whenever you create a user, make sure you download this file. Now, if I have to log in from my command line to AWS CLI, the command which I'm going to use is AWS configure. Once I click on AWS configure and then give enter, it will ask me the access key ID. This access key ID will be the same as what we got from our GUI console. This is considered as the username, and the secret access key is considered as the password. So once you enter both these details, then it will ask you the default region name in which you want to work. You can give any value based on the different regions which are available. And then whenever you run a specific command, you want to see the outputs in which format. There are different formats available, which we'll see in another videos. So let's get started. Your first step on launching an instance from GUI would be that after you log into the management console, you will go to EC2 compute instance. Let's see, how do we navigate to this instance via CLI? So always the commands would be starting with AWS, and then we would specify the service which I'm going to use. So in my case, it is EC2. After we select the instance or the service, we'll be clicking on instance from GUI. And we'll be selecting the specific region in which we want to launch our instance. Maybe based on your user environment, we will always aim to launch the instance which is near to your clients. So in my case, let's say I'm selecting Asia Pacific Singapore region. How do we select this from CLI? So while you are configuring AWS configure, it will ask you the default region name. So in here, I can mention the region name as AP Southeast-1. And in order to verify, then again, I can type this command AWS configure and then list. It will also show me the region which is configured based on the credentials that I have given. Now, from GUI, the next step would be clicking on launch instance. Let's see how do we correlate this from CLI. So in CLI, it would be AWS EC2 and then run instances because you want to launch an instance. So the command which we are going to use is run instances. Then once we click on launch instance, we'll be asked to select the image which we plan to launch. So the AWS marketplace or specific AMI images which you see will always be given a unique ID. And these unique IDs are these AMI dash some specific numbers. These are the unique IDs which are given to the different set of images which are available on AWS Cloud. So if you need to define or launch a specific instance, we will use the command as --image-id, and then we will give the specific image ID what we plan to launch. After we have selected the image ID, we are going to choose the specific type. What is the server configuration that I plan to launch? Maybe I need 4 GB or 8 GB or maybe 16 GB. So there are different types of instances which are available, and based on the specific size, the CPU and the memory, they are given different names like T2.nano or T2.micro. So in my case, if from GUI, I'm going to select T2.micro, let's see how do we mention this from CLI. So until this part we were done, then in order to define the instance type, I will use the command as --instance -type T2.micro. Then in the next page, we will see the option to define how many instances that we plan to launch. Maybe altogether I want to launch 2 or 3 instances of the same type. So in here, I can define the number of instances that I want to launch. And then it will also ask you for the option which data center you want to launch. So in case of Amazon, it is denoted by the subnet, and each subnet in a specific region will be having unique subnet IDs. So in order to define this in our CLI, let's see what we use. So we are done until this part. So from here, if I have to define the count, the command which I'm going to use is minus count space 1, then minus subnet dash ID and the specific subnet ID. You will see this subnet ID is unique based on the different data centers that you are choosing. So whatever you have chosen in GUI, we are going to define the exact same subnet ID here. Then if you click on next, it will show the default storage where the image is going to be installed. So when we are referring this from CLI, we don't have to explicitly mention any storage unless we plan to add ephemeral storage to our OS. Moving on to the next step. As I mentioned earlier, always it is a good practice that whatever instances or configuration objects that you launch or configure on AWS or be it any cloud, it is a good practice to add the tags. And tags will always be having two options. First is the key and the next is the value. Maybe your name or email address. Your name, your department is the key and which department you belong to is the value. So for demo purpose, I'm just using the key as department and value as operations. Let's see, how do we define this in terms of CLI? Now we were done until this part. So in order to specify the tags, we will use the command as minus tag dash specifications is equal to. This is a bit unique in terms of what we have done so far. Whenever you are specifying the tags, it is always required that you mention the resource type as well, whether you are adding the tag to maybe, in this case, it is an instance. If we do some other configurations, it might be some other object. Maybe you're creating a security group or creating a key. So you always have to specify what is the resource type with which you are adding the tag. So always this would be tag specifications is equal to, first would be the resource type. So in my case, it is an instance, and then the tag's value. Tag is a key array wherein the first part is key is equal to department and then value is equal to operations. Next step would be our security group. Security groups are like firewall to the instance which you are launching. So these are object configurations which will control the traffic to your instance and from your instance. So by default, when you create it from CLI or GUI, it will, in here ask you or give you the option to specify the source IPs. So you can select the source IP from which you maybe want to, if you're launching a Linux instance, you can define the SSH access. Maybe if you plan to launch HTTP server on this, you can add a HTTP service as well. So let's see, how do we define security groups on CLI? First, in order to define or mention the security groups in my command, I have to make sure the security group is created. So in order to verify the different security groups which are present on my AWS console, the command which I'm going to use is AWS EC2. EC2 is the service within which I'm going to find my security groups. So describe security groups is the command, and this is the output which you will see in JSON format. This will show you all the security groups which are currently present in your region. Let's see how this looks from GUI perspective. So if you navigate to EC2 and network security groups, or maybe from the EC2 service directly click on this security group options, it will show you the default security group which is present in your region. And this security group will always have two types of rules. First is your inbound rule, and the next is your outbound rule. Inbound rule controls the traffic which is coming from outside towards your instance, and outbound rule control the traffic which is going from your instance towards external network. So by default, the inbound rules will not have any rules or any source IPs to be allowed, and by default, outbound will be allowed. So let's see, if I need to create a security group from CLI, the command which I'm going to use is AWS EC2 and then create security group and -- group dash name. Then I will be defining the name of my security group and give a description to it. I can give maybe a description as my VPC dash security group. So this will create a security group. Now, the next step is, even after we create the security group, we have to define the rules as well. So let's see, when we run these steps, how does it look from the GUI perspective? So in here, we'll see a security group will get created in which we have both inbound rules as well as outbound rules. So inbound rules will have no rules defined by default when you create a security group like this. And outbound will have for all traffic. So outbound is always allowed and inbound is always blocked by default. So let's see how can we add up rules so that we can access our instances. In here, we are going to use the command as AWS EC2 is the service, and then authorize security group ingress, which is going to allow us to create new incoming rules to our security groups. Then with -- group ID, I'm going to define the unique ID which got assigned to my security group when I created it. So all the security groups that you create will be assigned a specific unique ID. So with using this command, authorize security group ingress, I'm going to create new rule, incoming rule, where in my group ID is this, and then what is it that I have to define? The protocol is TCP. I have to allow port 22 and the source from where I have to allow. So let's say I give my source segment. Once I configure this, this is how it would look like from GUI. So SSH is the service, TCP is the protocol, the port is 22, and I'm going to allow from this segment. I'm not touching anything on the outbound rules, so it will show us the default which is already present. So now that I have created the security group as well as defined the inbound rules, let's go ahead with the next step of launching our instance. So from GUI, we were on this page. Once we click on review and launch, in order to define this exact same segment in CLI, we have defined until the tag options. So to define the security group we just created, we'll just define as minus minus security dash groups and then the name of security group. At last, we'll get this review page to review whatever we have selected. And then we click on launch. We don't have to do any changes here from this page perspective. So the command is still same. Once we click on launch, you will be asked to select a key pair. So by default, whenever you launch a specific image instance on AWS, the way that you are going to log onto that instance will be, the authentication will be based on the keys. So either you can create your own key or select an existing key pair which is already present. So if in your region, let's say you don't have any specific key pair, you can either choose, if it is already there, you can choose the key pair. If it is not there, then you have the option to create a new key pair. Make sure whenever you create a new key pair, you download this locally as well. This is very much required. And then we click on launch instances. Now let's see how can we relate this to CLI. Now, my first step would be to verify if there are any keys present on my AWS cloud or not. In order to check this, again, the way that I'm going to structure or build the command would be, first is always AWS, then the specific service, and describe dash key dash pairs would show me the different key pairs which are existing in my account. So at present, none are existing. So let's go ahead and create a key pair. So again, we'll follow the same syntax, AWS, EC2. And now in order to create a key pair, we'll always use the command as create key dash pair, and then specify minus minus key dash name and specify the name. This is the command and this is what name I want to specify. And whenever you run this, the output, run the command like this, it will show you the key details in your output. Now, again, it is very difficult for me, to copy the output from this key material attribute, this complete output, and then save it in a notepad. I don't want to do that. So instead, you have the option to save this to a file. So in order to save this, again, we are going to use a command. Until now, here, the command is still same. AWS, then the specific service, and what is the task that you want to do. And then you specify the attribute. Let's say the key name is your key name. And after this, then the output, whatever I'm getting the output from here, I'm going to query using the parameter, the command as minus minus query. And the key material is the option, what I'm interested in, which I'm going to send it to this file on my local system. So with this, if I open the file, I will see something like this. So now my key file is saved on my local system. Now, let's verify the key which I just generated is present on our AWS cloud. So this time, if I run AWS EC2 describe key pairs, it will show me the key pair which is existing, but it is not showing me the value again. So I will not be able to see those values Again, that's why it is recommended whenever you create a key, always make sure you save the output to a file. Now, finally, that we have generated the security group, we have also generated our key pair. Let's launch the OS using the key which we have generated. So the command which we have been using so far until tags and then defining the security groups, in order to define the keys, which always remember, if you don't define the key with which you are going to launch the OS, you will not be able to log into that OS. So this is again an important parameter. So minus minus key name, my OS key, which is the name of key which I just created. Now, but when I do this, it is giving me an error. You see, it is saying run instance, the parameter group name cannot be used with parameter subnet. So always keep this in mind, is whenever you define the subnet ID, which is your specific data, which represents your specific data center, you also have to specify not the security group name, instead the security group ID. So we'll use the command as minus minus security dash group dash IDs. Each security group that we create, or the default one, will be having a name, and apart from the name, it will have a unique ID. So you have to mention the unique ID and then the key name. The moment you enter this, you will get output something like this. This means that your instance is now launched. Now, after your instance is launched, if you log into your GUI and see, it will be shown something like this. The instance state is running and status check is initializing. So it will take a while for this also to get completed. And after a while, if you check, it will show something like this. The instance is running and the initial checks also have passed. So now that OS is successfully launched, let's try to log into the instance. Now, if I use SSH, there are different ways in which I can log in using SSH. If SSH is not enabled on your Windows, you can even use PuTTY. So in my case, I'm using SSH and then -L. After this, EC2-user, it is the default user which is created by the AWS when launching the instance for AMI Linux. So I'm using the username, and then I would specify the public IP address for my instance, and how I am going to authenticate is using my key. So I am going to define my identity is this key. But once I try to run this, it is giving me an error saying that the load key, it is of invalid format. Let's check, let's open this file and see why is it showing as invalid format. So once you open this file, you will observe that, the way that this key file is arranged, you will be observing /n/n/n, which is a representation of next line character everywhere. And this is the main reason why, while trying to authenticate, it is not accepting this as a valid format file. So how do we avoid that? Let's see. Let's create a new key pair. So, but this time, again, we are going to use same AWS, EC2, then create key pair command, define the name, and with this query, which is our key material, we are just adding one more additional part, is the output format as text. So output format as text, which we are saving it again to a file. And this time, if I open the file, it will show the output like this. So it is no more showing you /n/n format. Now, once I've corrected the issue with my key, let's launch the instance using the new key. And this time, if I launch the instance, I'm going to refer the new key name which I just created. And if all this command options you have entered correctly, you will get the output something like this. This is a JSON format output which represents that your instance is launched. Now let's try doing SSH to the instance again using the new key. And this time we see we are successfully authenticated and have logged in to our instance. So with this, we have completed the basic section on how to launch an instance from AWS CLI. Let's try to summarize this. So initially we started with installing the CLI package on our client machine so that we are able to run AWS commands from our endpoints. After this, we created a specific user so that from my command line, which is Windows machine or maybe Linux machine, I will be able to authenticate to the AWS cloud. Then we saw how to build up the commands to launch an instance via CLI. We did it both via GUI and saw the corresponding command in CLI. We created a key pair to log into the device using CLI. We created a security group to allow the SSH access. And we also saw that when you're creating a key, there is a possibility that the output is not getting saved in the correct format. So it will show you as invalid format. So we already also fixed it. And with this, I'm going to end up this session. I hope this has been informative to you. Stay tuned until the next session.